time I've started this video, but it's part 5, Empire of Normality, Robert Chapman, and I want to get it finished, these notes, because I don't like things hanging over me. I don't know if it's an autistic thing, but if I start something, I like to finish it. So this is part 5, and I should be paraphrasing or phrasing from the book. So in the 1990s, US President Bush referred to that decade as the decade of the brain. There was a huge increase in funding for mental health, and new mental and neurological disorders were recognized, classified and diagnosed in greater numbers. There were new therapies and drugs to treat them. American psychiatry was increasingly exported around the world, primarily led by drug companies. Biomedical narratives followed the logic of the markets. In spite of this, mental health didn't improve and has flatlined since the 1980s, and may have got even worse according to some data, and it was cited in the book. New and old psychotropic meds were prescribed to almost a quarter of the UK population in 2018. The shift from Keynesian to Hayekian economics at the time of Thatcher and Reagan is vital for understanding the rising tide of mental health problems. Hayek is Hayek, and it was his form of economics. Neoliberalism liberated individual entrepreneurial freedoms and skills characterized by private property rights, free markets and free trade. In practice, this meant free privatization, deregulation and austerity. Thatcher and Reagan reversed the welfare capitalism of before and rolled back the state and diminished the welfare state. Neoliberalism was soon enforced across the rest of the world. As state communism fell, even Russia and China liberalized their economies to fit with the new global system. Traditionally left-leaning parties in liberal democracies shifted to the right. Organized labor was crushed by neoliberal governments, and neoliberal ideology was propagated by the press. Neoliberal ideology pervaded our way of thinking and the common sense way many of us interpret, live and understand the world. That was Harvey. And mental health wasn't immune to this shift. UK benefits policy continues to reflect this. For example, in 2009, New Labour committed itself early in its third term in government to removing people from incapacity benefit, implying that many claimants are malingerers. Now that I discussed in an earlier one, and we've seen that all through austerity of 2010, 11, 12 onwards. We've now got another Labour government, but I doubt that they're going to reverse a lot of it. Sass's notion of mental illness, of people pretending to be ill to avoid responsibility, feeds into neoliberal ideology. For Sass, as for the neoliberal, everyone is just an individual fully responsible for their own positioning. Without a clearly defined and identifiable biological impairment, they are in the Sassian tradition and Hayekian worldview considered malingerers, pretending to suffer from false illness that do not really exist. That's all quoted from the book and those approaches. The harms of capitalism were recognised, but even the possibility of imagining and fighting for a coherent alternative became less possible. All that was left was to strive for normality and wealth in competition with the other unwell workers. Thatcher saw poverty as an individual rather than a structural problem, and we saw this in the years of austerity since 2010 with IDS and people like that. Thatcher said, poor people didn't know how to budget or how to spend their earnings. And how many times do you hear politicians say that? She saw them as having an individual personality defect. This is important for understanding worsening mental health in connection with rising inequality. The accumulation of capital was in the hands of a few. Workers' rights were weakened. Workers had less control over their workplaces and had to work longer hours. Ferguson draws on Marx's concept of alienation. to argue that changes in the workplace have led to worsening mental health. The intensification of work has led to an epidemic of work-related stress. Those in low-paid or those in low-paid or who are unemployed experience the worst effects, and austerity measures are associated with a high rate of suicides. Neoliberal governments also cut funding for health services at the same time. The biomedical approach only treated symptoms with blunt biomedical tools and therefore has been unable to stem the rising tide of mental illness. Chapman mentions a new alienation. Marx argued that when workers are forced to sell their labour just so others could profit, it is harmful to the worker, stunting both their health and their growth. Although Marx didn't use the language of mental health, it would today be described in medical terminology. Although Marx was mainly referring to factory work, now service industries and what Wright termed the personality market are where the new alienation is prevalent. In modern services economy, ways of feeling and kindness and friendliness become rationalised to further the sale of something. There is a cost of emotional labour, for example, flight attendants and telephone companies. In the 1980s, telephone companies gave their workers Valium or codeine to bear the cost of emotional labour. New technological inventions like the personal computer, the internet and the digital revolution have led to the rise of cognitive labour and cognitive capitalism. Traditional industrial capitalism was based on physical labour and material production, but since around 1975 it's been mainly about the accumulation of knowledge. Much capital is created by countless solitary individuals sitting in front of screens, typing, scrolling and calculating to produce an endless variety of cognitive contents. Close quotes. And that's just a sample of what Robert Chapman talks about, the new alienation and the rise of neoliberalism. And I think it's best to read the book to get the full experience, but I just wanted just to give a flavour of it. And next time I will be looking a bit more about I've talked about, Robert Chapman's talked about the Fordist era, from Henry Ford and the effect on work and things like that, and how it relates to neurodiversity.